A cathedral's true blueprint was written in a secret language of numbers. These stone giants were not built by faith alone, but by masterminds who encoded cosmic order into every pillar and pane. By the end of this, you will see these ancient structures not as monuments of rock, but as profound mathematical and spiritual statements. We will uncover why a master builder might hide a sacred geometric puzzle in a window's tracery, and how the very stones were arranged to sing. What does it take to build a prayer in stone? Stone began to defy its own weight in the 12th century. This was an age of awakening, where the quiet hum of scholarly thought echoed from newly founded universities in cities like Paris and Oxford. Ancient texts, long forgotten in Europe, were finding their way back through trade and translation, bringing with them the rigorous logic of geometry and the precise science of mathematics. This intellectual fervor did not stay confined to parchment. It spilled out into the streets, into the very spirit of the age, creating a society ripe for an architectural revolution. Faith was as powerful as ever, but it was now a faith seeking understanding, a desire to comprehend the divine order through reason. This unique fusion created the perfect conditions for the master builders. They were more than stonemasons. They were thinkers, geometers, and visionaries who saw in these newly rediscovered principles a way to reach for the heavens. The thick, dark walls of the older Romanesque churches began to feel like a prison for the spirit. The people craved light, height, and a sense of soaring grandeur that would lift the soul. This was the catalyst. The societal will for a more luminous house of worship met the technological and mathematical courage of these master artisans. They looked at the limitations of stone and mortar and asked a revolutionary question. What if the walls did not have to be solid? What if we could turn stone into a skeletal frame, a web of support that would allow us to replace rock with radiant glass? Understanding this vibrant context is essential. These cathedrals were not sudden miracles that appeared from nowhere. They were the direct product of a dynamic and evolving era, a time when human intellect and spiritual yearning joined forces to reshape the very skyline. These visionaries carried no official title of architect. They were known as the master builders, a name that barely captures the vastness of their role. Think of a single person who was part structural engineer, part artistic director, and part mystical mathematician. Their training was a lifelong pilgrimage. A young apprentice might begin by mixing mortar, but his true education involved traveling across continents, studying the rising skeletons of other cathedrals, and absorbing every technique from different guilds and cultures. This was not a formal university course. It was an oral and practical tradition, a secret science passed from master to apprentice on dusty scaffolding high above the world. Their minds became libraries of practical knowledge, from how to source stone that could bear immense weight to the precise angle for a flying buttress. Yet their most profound skill was fluency in the silent language of sacred geometry. They did not just see a circle or a triangle. They saw in these shapes the fundamental principles of creation, the divine order they believed governed the universe. A blueprint was not merely a set of instructions. It was a symbolic diagram, a prayer rendered in line and proportion. Every decision, from the layout of the foundation to the pattern in a rose window, was an act of aligning the earthly with the celestial. And for this, they often sought no fame. Their work was a form of devotion offered for the greater glory of God and their community. Their names are mostly lost to history, etched away by wind and rain, but their legacy stands firm. They achieved something modern society often struggles to replicate: a perfect fusion of rigorous hands-on craft with the most profound cosmic principles. The cathedral was their ultimate theorem, written not on paper but in stone and light. A perfect circle drawn in the sand was their first and most powerful alphabet. For the master builder, this simple shape was the seed from which an entire cathedral would grow, a symbol of divine perfection and unity. This was the core of sacred geometry, a visual language they believed was written into the fabric of creation itself. They saw the universe as an orderly, harmonious system, and by using the same geometric principles that govern the motions of planets or the growth of a seashell, they could construct a building that was a true reflection of the cosmos. It was their way of translating the mind of the Creator into stone and light. This language was built on specific, powerful ratios. One of the most revered was the golden section, a proportional relationship where a line is divided so that the smaller part is to the larger part as the larger part is to the whole. This ratio, often found in nature from the spiral of a nautilus shell to the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, was seen as a direct bridge between the earthly and the divine. It created a sense of beauty that felt instinctively right, a harmony that resonated deep within the human spirit. But the builder's geometric toolkit was far more extensive. They began with the vesica piscis, the almond shape created by the overlap of two circles of the same size. This was not just a shape, it was a generative act. From its precise proportions, they could derive the square and the equilateral triangle, the very building blocks for laying out a cathedral's floor plan. Then there was the profound challenge of squaring the circle, an attempt to create a circle and a square with the same perimeter. This was more than a mathematical puzzle. It was a spiritual metaphor for reconciling the eternal, heavenly circle with the finite, earthly square. They also used root rectangles, dynamic proportions based on the square roots of 2, 3, and 5, which gave the structures a vibrant, living rhythm instead of a static, box-like feel. We can see this silent symphony of numbers at Chartres Cathedral. Its entire layout is a precise geometric diagram. The distance from the entrance to the altar, the width of the nave, the placement of the pillars, all encode mathematical constants that correspond to musical harmonics. The space was literally tuned like a musical instrument, designed to create a resonant harmony that would elevate the soul. Why did they go to such incredible lengths? They held a profound belief that certain shapes and proportions had the power to alter human consciousness. Standing in a space built according to cosmic order, a worshipper could feel more connected to that order, their spirit lifted by the same geometric truths that guided the stars. This reveals the stunning depth of their work. Every line drawn, every curve carved was never just about structural necessity. It was a deliberate, deeply philosophical act, a form of prayer made visible for all to experience. Beyond the silent language of shapes, the master builders spoke in a code of numbers. Every measurement, every count was a deliberate choice, a word in a whispered theological argument written in stone. They believed that numbers were not merely quantities but the very essence of creation, holding sacred meanings that could channel divine presence into their work. A cathedral's design was therefore a complex numerical prayer, with every element calculated to resonate with cosmic and spiritual truths. The number 3, representing the Holy Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, was perhaps the most fundamental. You can see its rhythm everywhere. Many cathedrals are laid out in 3 primary sections: the nave, the transepts, and the sanctuary, mirroring the triune nature of God. The classic Gothic window is often a trio of lancets, 3 tall, narrow arches grouped together. Even the soaring vertical structure is divided into 3 tiers: the ground-level arcade, the triforium gallery, and the upper clerestory windows, lifting the eye and the spirit from earth to heaven in a trio of ascents. This was not a coincidence, it was a constant, subtle reinforcement of a core Christian mystery. Then there is the number 7, the number of divine perfection and completion, drawn from the 7 days of creation. This might manifest in the 7 sacraments depicted in stained glass, or in a chapel dedicated to 7 saints. The number 12, symbolizing the 12 apostles and the foundation of the heavenly Jerusalem, frequently dictated the number of pillars in a crypt or the major supports in a choir, physically embodying the idea of the church being built upon the apostles. These numerical codes were not arbitrary decorations. They were deeply rooted in a fusion of biblical tradition and ancient Platonic thought, which held that numbers were the immutable ideas in the mind of God. By building with these numbers, the Masons were aligning their creation with a celestial blueprint. Sometimes the mathematics reveals itself in even more subtle, organic ways. Look closely at the stone carvings of leaves and vines that adorn the capitals of columns. The way the leaves spiral outwards, their arrangement and growth pattern, often follows a sequence of numbers known as the Fibonacci sequence. In this sequence, each number is the sum of the 2 preceding it, creating a progression of 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. This is the same pattern found in the arrangement of sunflower seeds and pinecone scales. The builders were observing God's handiwork in nature and deliberately mirroring it in their own art, creating a building that felt as alive and divinely ordered as the natural world. The ultimate goal of this numerical symphony was stability that transcended the physical. The precise ratios, like the sacred golden section derived from these sequences, did more than just ensure the arches would stand. They created proportions that the human eye and soul find inherently harmonious. The spaces were tuned like the strings of a great instrument to vibrate with a perceived cosmic frequency. This was their genius, to construct a space that did not merely house the spirit, but actively guided it upward through a carefully orchestrated experience of number, light, and form. The stone itself was taught to count, and in its tally to sing. The parchment was the true foundation, a sacred space where the cathedral first took form. Before the quarrymen's hammers ever rang out, the master builder would bend over a sheet of vellum, his compass and straight edge translating divine vision into a web of geometric lines. These were not mere construction documents, they were spiritual maps encoding the entire journey of faith into the very footprint of the building. The process always began with a simple, profound act of geometry. A master might start with the vesica piscis, that almond shape formed by 2 overlapping circles. This shape, also called the mandala, was a powerful symbol of the intersection between heaven and earth, often seen in art framing figures of Christ or the Virgin Mary. From this single generative form, an entire grid of squares and triangles could unfold, creating the proportional framework for every wall and window. Other plans might be generated from the pentagram, a 5-pointed star revered for its perfect internal proportions, a shape believed to hold powerful cosmic significance. We are fortunate to have a rare window into this process through the surviving sketchbook of a 13th-century master builder, Villard de Honnecourt. His pages are a breathtaking mix of the practical and the mystical. One moment he is meticulously detailing how to construct a mechanical saw, and the next he is explaining the geometric scheme for a perfect human face or the layout of a church choir based on the rotation of a pentagon. For Villard and his peers, there was no separation between the technical and the symbolic, the machine and the soul. The most profound example of this symbolic intent is found in the very shape of the cathedral itself. Look down from above upon a classic Gothic ground plan. You will see the form of the cross, This was no accident. The entire structure was designed as a giant symbol of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. The long central nave represents the body of Christ and the path walked by the faithful toward salvation. The transepts crossing the nave form the arms of the cross, while the sanctuary at the eastern end, where the altar stands, represents the head, the seat of divine wisdom. This meant that every person who entered the building was, quite literally, stepping into a representation of the story of their faith. Their physical journey from the west door, through the nave, and finally to the altar for communion, mirrored their spiritual journey from a state of sin toward redemption and grace. The blueprint was a multidimensional guide. It charted the precise angles for the flying buttresses and the thickness of the piers, ensuring the building would stand for centuries. But simultaneously, it mapped a path for the soul's ascent, using sacred geometry to create a space that would actively shape the consciousness of everyone within it. The master builder was not just drawing a building, he was drafting an experience of the divine. High above the ground, the master builder's geometric visions met the resistance of reality. The air was thick with the grit of limestone and the rhythmic percussion of steel on stone. Here, on the scaffolds, the ethereal language of number and symbol was translated into something solid and permanent. This translation required a guild of highly specialized artisans, the stonemasons, whose hands and tools bridged the gap between a perfect circle drawn on parchment and an arch that could hold up the sky. They were the ones who gave muscle to the mind's grand design. Their work began with the raw block, a rough piece of quarried stone. Using a tool called a square, they would ensure each face was perfectly perpendicular, creating a precise ashlar block that could bear immense loads with mathematical certainty. Yet this square was more than just a tool for checking angles. In the symbolic language of the Masons, it represented morality and truth, the foundational virtue upon which an honest life and a stable building were both constructed. Alongside it, the compass, used to inscribe circles and arcs, was a potent emblem of eternity and the infinite reach of the divine spirit, and the level, which ensured every course of stone was perfectly horizontal, stood for justice and equality. Every time a mason used these tools, he was not just measuring stone, he was reaffirming a code of spiritual and ethical principles. The most complex task was the creation of arches and the magnificent rib vaults that formed the cathedral's ceiling. This was a feat of temporary engineering in its own right. The masons would first build a wooden skeleton, a framework called centering, which outlined the exact shape of the intended arch. They would then carefully lay the precisely cut voussoirs, the wedge-shaped stones, against this wooden form. The true magic happened when the centering was removed. If the geometry was perfect, if every angle and curve was calculated correctly, the stones would lock into place, supporting not only their own weight but the immense downward thrust, channeling it safely into the pillars and buttresses below. It was a breathtaking act of faith in calculation, and on nearly every stone they set, these anonymous craftsmen left a tiny, personal mark. These masons' marks, often a simple combination of straight lines, a star, or a unique cross, were chiseled into the hidden face of the block. They were practical signatures used by the master to track a man's work and ensure he was paid for the stones he had cut. But today, they are something more profound. They are the whispers of individuality in a colossal collective effort. They remind us that these cathedrals were not built by a single genius, but by hundreds of skilled hands, each man contributing his own small piece of perfection to the divine whole. This was the ultimate collaboration, a seamless marriage where theoretical knowledge guided the skilled hand, and the hand, in turn, gave lasting form to the soaring vision. Yet the master builder's vision was not confined to the soaring heights. On the cold stone floor of Chartres Cathedral, a different kind of path unfolds, one designed not for the eyes but for the feet and the soul. This is the labyrinth, a vast circular maze inlaid into the nave, a puzzle etched into the very ground upon which the faithful walked. To the modern eye, it might appear as a beautiful decoration, but for the medieval pilgrim, it was a profound spiritual tool. This intricate, winding path was not meant to be solved with the intellect, but with the body. Pilgrims would enter and slowly, often on their knees, trace its complex route. With each painful step, the outside world faded away. The journey to the center was a physical act of penance and meditation, a symbolic representation of the difficult, twisting path of a human life striving toward God. The labyrinth was a container for this sacred struggle, offering a structured path through the chaos of existence. Its construction was a marvel of sacred geometry. The classic design, known as an 11-circuit labyrinth, is built from a precise seed pattern of a cross, 4 dots, and connecting lines. From this simple Christian framework, the builder would use his compass to generate 11 concentric paths that coil and turn back on themselves, creating a single, non-branching route that covers the entire circle before finally arriving at a rosette at the center. This geometric perfection was no accident. It mirrored the cosmic order encoded in the cathedral's walls, bringing that divine harmony down to the level of human passage. The form itself echoes ancient mythological motifs, like the legendary Labyrinth of Crete, but here its meaning is transformed. It is no longer a prison for a monster, but a guided journey toward enlightenment. The act of walking it was a microcosm of the pilgrim's larger quest. Many could not travel to far-off holy lands, but here, within the safety of their own cathedral, they could embark on an interior pilgrimage. The long and seemingly meandering path represented a life of faith, with its trials, doubts, and unexpected turns. Reaching the center symbolized achieving a moment of divine connection or spiritual clarity. But the journey was not complete there, for the pilgrim then had to turn around and walk back out, carrying that hard-won piece back into the world. This transformed the entire floor into a dynamic, participatory symbol. The architecture was no longer just something to be admired, it was something to be lived. It physically facilitated a deeply personal, immersive experience, proving that the cathedral's power was not just in its ability to lift the gaze upward, but in its capacity to guide the faithful, one deliberate step at a time, on the most important journey of all. High above the labyrinth, another geometric marvel captures the light, transforming it into a cascade of divine narrative. The rose window is far more than a circular portal of colored glass. It is a cosmic mandala, a meticulously ordered vision of the universe rendered in stone and light. Its perfect circular form is the primary symbol of eternity, a shape with no beginning and no end, mirroring the boundless nature of God. Radiating from its center, the petal-like tracery often numbers 12, a direct reference to the 12 apostles who formed the foundation of the church, or sometimes the 24 elders of the apocalypse. Each segment can represent an hour of the divine day, a month of the sacred year, or a rung on the ladder of spiritual virtues, guiding the soul inward toward enlightenment. But this breathtaking beauty rests upon a foundation of ruthless mathematical precision. Constructing such a vast window of stone and glass in a towering wall was an act of architectural defiance. The secret lay in the intricate stone armature, the delicate-looking tracery that frames the glass. This is not mere decoration, it is the window's skeleton. Each curving stone rib is a carefully engineered component, designed to channel the immense weight of the window and the wall around it downward and outward, distributing the forces along predetermined paths to the surrounding pillars and buttresses. The master builder had to calculate the exact angles and thicknesses of these ribs, ensuring that this great stone web would lock together in perfect compression, a fragile-looking yet immensely strong geometric shield against gravity itself. Within this stone framework, the stained glass completes the sermon. The specific iconography was never random. The glass panels were arranged in a deliberate hierarchy, creating a visual theology. Often, the very center of the rows might depict Christ in majesty or the Virgin Mary, representing the ultimate source of divine light and order. Radiating outward from this central figure, concentric rings might display prophets, saints, angels, or scenes from the Bible, each ring representing a different order of creation or a step in sacred history. This arrangement actively directs the viewer's contemplation. Your eye is drawn from the outer, more earthly figures, inward toward the central, heavenly figure, mirroring the soul's own desired journey from the material world toward union with the divine. The window becomes a map for meditation. When the sun streams through, the entire space is transformed. The light itself becomes a teacher, projecting a shimmering, ever-changing vision of this celestial order onto the floor and the people below, immersing them in the story. In the rose window, the master builder achieved his ultimate synthesis. The rigid logic of geometry supports the fluid beauty of art, which in turn illuminates the deepest truths of theology, all fused into a single, luminous instrument designed to elevate the human spirit. Perched on the highest cornices, stone monsters keep their silent watch. Their faces are twisted into grimaces, their bodies a menagerie of chimeras and demons, seemingly at odds with the serene saints below. Yet these gargoyles and grotesques were not a contradiction to the sacred space. They were its fierce protectors. Their first duty was brutally practical. A gargoyle is, in its essence, a masterfully engineered waterspout, carved with a long, open mouth and a hollow channel running through its body. It was designed to catch the torrential rain sweeping off the vast roof. It then hurled the water far away from the cathedral's walls, preventing destructive erosion from seeping into the precious mortar and weakening the structure. Every downpour became a spectacle, with these stone beasts appearing to vomit forth the very heavens, a dramatic display of function carved into fearsome form. But their role extended far beyond mere plumbing. These figures were believed to be apotropaic, a powerful word that simply means they were thought to ward off evil. In the medieval worldview, the spiritual world was as real as the physical one, filled with unseen malevolent forces. The logic was potent, like placing a scarecrow in a field. By carving the most terrifying images imaginable on the exterior of the church, the builders were creating a first line of defense. They believed that evil spirits, upon seeing their own likeness already guarding the building, would be fooled into thinking the place was already occupied or protected by a greater demonic power, and thus would flee. The sacred interior, the realm of light and order, was shielded by a garrison of stone nightmares. So what are we to make of these monstrous forms, these dragons, griffins, and misshapen hybrids? They likely served as a powerful, visible sermon about the nature of the world. Their placement on the outside of the church physically represented the chaos, sin, and untamed dangers that exist beyond the sanctity of the faith. A worshipper entering the cathedral would pass under their gaze, a reminder of the spiritual perils they were leaving behind as they crossed the threshold into a space of divine harmony. The cathedral was not an escape from reality, but a perfect microcosm of it. It encompassed the entirety of creation, from the highest angels in the stained glass to the most base creatures clinging to the gutters, all held in a delicate, divine balance. The gargoyle, in its grim majesty, teaches us that true holiness does not ignore the darkness, but confronts it, tames it, and puts it to work in the service of the light. That radiant transformation was the entire point. To step inside a Gothic cathedral at dawn is to witness a miracle of controlled illumination. As the sun climbs, its rays are captured by the vast windows, shattering into 1,000 fragments of ruby, sapphire, and emerald. The cold stone floor becomes a carpet of shimmering color, and the very air seems to thicken with luminous dust. This was not a pleasant side effect, it was the core of the theological mission. For the medieval mind, light was the most perfect physical manifestation of God. It was pure, immaterial, life-giving, and it could fill a space without breaking it. The architects were not just building with stone, they were building with light itself, using it as a direct metaphor for divine grace pouring into the world. This profound vision was made physically possible by one of history's greatest architectural innovations, the flying buttress. This external stone armature acts like a set of powerful fingers gripping the high walls of the nave. By leaping through the air from external piers, these buttresses catch the outward thrust generated by the vaulted ceiling and channel it safely down into the ground. This ingenious system meant the walls themselves no longer had to be thick, solid barriers bearing the entire load. They could become delicate skeletons of stone, with the spaces between the bones filled entirely with glass. The solid wall, which had once defined sacred architecture, was effectively dissolved and replaced by a membrane of colored light. But the master builders went even further, manipulating the very quality of this light for spiritual effect. They understood that different colors could evoke different emotional and psychological states. The deep, rich blues of the Virgin Mary's robes were not just a representation, they were intended to instill a feeling of celestial calm and contemplation. The fiery reds and oranges used in scenes of Pentecost or the martyrs were meant to stir the soul with passion and fervor. They were painting with light, using specific wavelengths to choreograph an emotional journey for the worshipper. This was a deliberate fusion of science and symbol. The manipulation of light was a precise strategy, turning the entire cavernous space into a vessel for a specific kind of experience. The goal was transcendence, to make the divine feel imminently present and tangible. In this luminous environment, the boundary between the earthly and the heavenly seemed to dissolve. The stone structure, for all its immense weight and strength, appeared to become ethereal, a mere frame for the true content of the building, which was the light of God. These secret brotherhoods were the invisible engine behind the stone and glass. While a cathedral rose publicly for all to see, its true intellectual foundations were being guarded in the lodges and workshops by closed societies like the Compagnons du Devoir. These were not simple trade unions, they were initiatic schools, part practical college and part mystical fraternity. Their mission was twofold: to protect the livelihood of their members by controlling the skilled labor market, and to protect a body of esoteric knowledge they believed was too powerful, too sacred, to be shared with the uninitiated. This knowledge encompassed everything from the advanced geometry needed to calculate a vault's thrust to the symbolic meanings hidden within a carving's design. For them, craft and spirit were one and the same. The path into this inner circle was long and arduous. A young boy would enter as an apprentice, often around the age of 12, signing on for years of service. His first duties were menial, sweeping the lodge, mixing mortar, and simply observing. But he was also being watched, his character assessed for honesty, patience, and dedication. This was as much a moral education as a technical one. If he proved worthy, he would eventually become a journeyman, a stage marked by a profound ritual. He was expected to embark on a Tour de France, a journey across the country to work on different building sites under different masters. This travel was not just about gaining varied experience, it was a pilgrimage, a symbolic wandering that mirrored the soul's own search for truth. Throughout this journey, he would be supported by a hidden network of companion lodges, identified through secret signs, handshakes, and passwords. These were not mere fraternal games, they were a vital security system. In an age without copyright or patents, a master's unique method for constructing a complex staircase or his geometric secret for a stable arch was his most valuable possession. Revealing it could mean losing his competitive edge, his very livelihood. The secret handshake at the door of a lodge in a strange city was a key, granting a traveling brother food, shelter, work, and access to a shared pool of guarded knowledge, all while keeping that knowledge safely within the family. The ultimate goal was to become a master, a status achieved only after creating a masterpiece that demonstrated total technical and artistic mastery. This closed, ritualistic system ensured that the art and mystery of building was passed down not as a set of dead instructions, but as a living tradition, infused with symbolic meaning and ethical weight. The survival of these companionages into the modern day, still training artisans and preserving their rights, suggests a continuous, unbroken thread of esoteric thought, a whispered conversation between the hands of the past and the present. A stone saint turns his head, his drapery flowing as if touched by a real wind, his eyes fixed on something beyond this world. This is the language of the Cathedral stone Bible, a silent sermon carved for an age when few could read the written word. The great portals and facades were not just adorned with sculpture, they were covered in a vast, coherent narrative system designed to instruct the faithful. Every figure, from the most majestic Christ to the most tormented demon, was part of a meticulously planned visual encyclopedia. For the medieval believer, approaching the west front of a cathedral like Notre Dame de Paris was like opening a giant, three-dimensional book. The entire surface teemed with stories, each statue and relief placed according to a profound symbolic logic that guided the viewer on a spiritual journey. The lowest levels often depicted the earthly and the grotesque, the world of sin and nature left untamed. As the eye traveled upward, the sculptures rose in spiritual hierarchy, from Old Testament kings and prophets to the apostles and saints, culminating in the heavenly court surrounding Christ in the tympanum above the doors. This vertical progression was a map of salvation, teaching that the path from a state of sin to a state of grace was an ascent. The messages were conveyed through a precise vocabulary of posture, gesture, and attribute. A figure standing straight with a calm expression represented virtue and order. A contorted body with a grimace embodied vice and chaos. The specific objects they held, their keys, their swords, their model churches, acted as instant identifiers. At the Cathedral of St. Lazarus in Autun, the terrifying Last Judgment tympanum presents a masterclass in this visual rhetoric. Christ presides at the center, enormous and serene, enclosed in a mandala symbolizing his divine glory. To his right, the saved souls are drawn upward by gentle angels, their bodies light and postures hopeful. To his left, the damned are seized by monstrous demons. Here, the sculptor Buttress used exaggerated body language to tell the whole story. The damned are dragged by their hair, their faces locked in screams of horror, one poor soul weighed on a scale only to be found wanting. The entire scene is a powerful, unforgettable exhortation about the eternal consequences of a life lived on earth, a sermon in stone that needed no priest to translate. This stone Bible also taught through allegory. On the facade of Notre Dame de Paris, a beautiful series personifies the virtues and vices. Charity, for instance, might be shown as a woman generously offering a cloak to a shivering figure, while her opposite, avarice, is depicted as a miserable creature clutching a heavy money bag to her chest. The symbolism is immediate and visceral. A viewer did not need to read a treatise on greed. They could see its corrosive effect carved into the very face and posture of the figure. The placement of these scenes was crucial. Often, the virtues were positioned on the right side of Christ, the side of the saved, and the vices on the left with the damned. This physical arrangement reinforced the moral choice presented to every person who walked through the doors. Before you can enter the light and harmony of the church, you must first pass under the gaze of these moral lessons. You are confronted with the choice between a life of virtue and a life of vice, between the path to heaven and the road to hell. The facade was a preparatory zone, a space for examination and reflection. It asked a piercing question of every soul approaching the sacred threshold: which path will you choose? The very stones of the cathedral were taught to sing. Beyond the visual spectacle of light and symbol, these vast spaces were engineered for sound, transforming the entire structure into a colossal musical instrument. The master builders understood that a prayer whispered in such a space was not merely spoken, but amplified and transformed, becoming part of the building's own resonant voice. This was not an accidental byproduct of the architecture. It was a core design principle, rooted in the same sacred mathematics that guided their compasses. They designed the cavernous naves and vaulted ceilings using harmonic proportions, where the ratios of a room's length, width, and height corresponded to perfect musical intervals. A space might be laid out so that its dimensions resonated with the pure, foundational interval of an octave, or the vibrant, open sound of a fifth. These are the same mathematical relationships that create consonance in music, the relationships that feel stable and pleasing to the ear. By building with these ratios, the architects were essentially tuning the cathedral itself, ensuring that the chants of the clergy and the emerging polyphony of the choir would not just fill the space, but would be enriched by it. The resulting acoustics created a profoundly immersive, otherworldly atmosphere. A single melodic line of Gregorian chant would not simply stop, it would linger, its notes blending together in a long, shimmering reverberation that seemed to hang in the air like incense. This sonic halo created a sense of timelessness, as if the music was not confined to a single moment but was echoing into eternity. For the medieval worshipper, this was not just a beautiful effect, it was a physical manifestation of the harmony of the spheres, the ancient belief that the planets in their motions produced a celestial music that filled the cosmos. The resonant space of the cathedral was a deliberate echo of that divine symphony, bringing the music of the heavens down to earth. This made the experience of worship an utterly multisensory journey. The visual lift of the soaring pillars, the kaleidoscopic light from the windows, and the enveloping cloud of sacred sound worked in concert to overwhelm the ordinary senses. In this environment, the boundary between the individual and the collective, between the human and the divine, began to dissolve. You did not just hear the music, you felt it in your bones. The architecture, acting as this immense amplifier, lifted the soul in a way that silent contemplation alone could never achieve. It was a full-body prayer where the very building joined the choir, and every note was a step closer to the divine. But could the stones themselves guard a secret more profound than any saint's relic? Beyond their sacred geometry and numerical codes, some believe these cathedrals conceal a different kind of map, one charting a path to the ultimate prize of medieval lore, the Holy Grail. This is not a story of chalices hidden in crypts, but of entire buildings designed as vast symbolic puzzles. At the heart of this modern mystery stands Chartres Cathedral, a structure so rich in esoteric symbolism that it has become a magnet for seekers. Theorists point to its famous labyrinth, suggesting its winding path is more than a spiritual exercise, that its 11 circuits and overall geometry correspond to a hidden landscape or a celestial chart. They scrutinize the precise alignments of its pillars and the unusual iconography in its stained glass, searching for clues the master builders may have left behind. This speculative web was spun most famously by authors like Henry Lincoln, who in the late 20th century proposed a breathtaking connection. He argued that the geometry found in the landscape around the French village of Rennes-le-Château, a place already steeped in Grail legends, was mirrored in the designs of certain local churches. According to this theory, the master builders used a system of pentagrams and sacred measurements to inscribe a secret into the very land, with the cathedrals acting as permanent markers on a hidden trail. Whether these claims hold any historical truth is fiercely debated by scholars, who often dismiss them as modern fantasies. Yet their immense power lies not in their factual accuracy, but in their enduring appeal. They demonstrate how the cathedral, in its staggering complexity and intentional mystery, continues to function as it was always meant to, as a catalyst for a quest. The physical journey to a holy site becomes a metaphor for the spiritual journey inward. The search for an external object, the Grail, transforms into a search for internal enlightenment, for a direct encounter with the divine. This is the true magic these structures hold. They are not passive monuments, but active participants in a dialogue across centuries, inviting each new generation to look closer, to ask deeper questions, and to embark on its own pilgrimage of discovery. The stones do not give up their secrets easily, and perhaps their greatest secret is that the real treasure was never hidden in them at all, but in the transformative act of searching itself. The soaring Gothic arch may feel like a purely European invention, but its elegant point whispers of a much longer journey. This signature element, along with the very mathematical daring that made these cathedrals possible, did not emerge in a vacuum. The great flowering of Gothic architecture in the 12th and 13th centuries coincided with a pivotal moment of reconnection between a fragmented Europe and the intellectually vibrant Islamic world. For centuries, while much of Europe was consumed with local struggles, scholars in places like Cordoba, Baghdad, and Damascus had been actively preserving, translating, and radically advancing the classical knowledge of Greece and Rome. In magnificent libraries and observatories, they refined algebra, perfected optics, and pushed the boundaries of geometry. This was not a static preservation, it was a dynamic renaissance in its own right. The pointed arch, so fundamental to the Gothic style, had been a staple of Islamic architecture for centuries, from the great mosques of Syria to the palaces of Persia. Its structural advantage was clear. It channeled weight more directly downward than the rounded Romanesque arch, allowing for taller, more stable walls and larger windows. When European crusaders and merchants traveled to the Holy Land and to Islamic Spain, they saw these forms in person. They walked through cities whose buildings demonstrated a mastery of geometry and engineering that far surpassed their own. The evidence suggests this was not mere coincidence, but a conscious and fruitful exchange. The complex star-shaped patterns in cathedral stone tracery, for instance, bear a striking resemblance to the intricate geometric mosaics known as jiri that adorned Islamic monuments. Both traditions were using the same universal language of shape and number to express a divine order, yet they were applying it to different spiritual contexts. This flow of ideas challenges a simplistic, Eurocentric view of the Gothic. It presents the cathedral not as an isolated miracle of Western Christendom, but as a hybrid masterpiece, a testament to a confluence of diverse intellectual streams. The master builders were brilliant synthesizers. They recognized powerful ideas regardless of their source and adapted them to their own profound vision. They took the pointed arch and the principles of advanced vaulting and fused them with their own deeply rooted traditions of Christian symbolism and sacred number. The result was something entirely new, a style that could not have been born without this cross-cultural pollination. The stones of Chartres and Notre Dame, therefore, hold within them not only the prayers of French masons, but also the distant echoes of conversations held in Andalusian courtyards and under Middle Eastern domes, a silent tribute to the shared foundations of human knowledge. The cathedral was also a cosmic clock, its stones whispering the secrets of the seasons. Built into the very alignment of these structures was a deep awareness of celestial rhythms, transforming them into sophisticated observatories that bridged the earthly and the heavenly. Certain cathedrals were precisely oriented so that on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the rising sun would send a single, brilliant beam of light shooting directly down the central axis of the nave. This dramatic event was more than a spectacle. It was a divine confirmation, a moment when the architecture itself proved its alignment with the cosmos. It marked a sacred point in the solar year, integrated into the liturgical calendar to celebrate the fullness of light as a manifestation of God's glory. Beyond these annual alignments, some churches housed even more precise instruments. In the Church of Saint Sulpice in Paris, a marvel of astronomical engineering was embedded in the floor. This is the gnomon, a device designed to track the sun's progress with stunning accuracy. A small hole high in a southern window acts like a camera obscura. At solar noon, the brightest moment of the day, a sliver of sunlight passes through this aperture and strikes a brass meridian line inlaid across the floor and up an obelisk. Throughout the year, the spot of light travels along this line. It reaches its northernmost point at the summer solstice and its southernmost at the winter solstice, turning the entire floor into a giant, functional calendar. This was not a secret or heretical device, but a tool to calculate the correct date for Easter, a movable feast that depends entirely on the spring equinox and the phases of the moon. This integration of cosmic cycles into the heart of worship reveals a world view where no division existed between science and spirit. The master builders saw the movement of the heavens as the most visible expression of divine order. By building these observations into the fabric of the church, they were physically demonstrating that human time and sacred time were part of one continuous, harmonious whole. The building itself became a sundial for the soul, marking the passage of hours, seasons, and holy days with unwavering celestial accuracy. Why go to such incredible lengths? Because for them, to understand the cosmos was to draw closer to its creator. Every beam of light that touched the meridian line, every solstice sunrise that flooded the choir, was a silent sermon on the perfection of God's creation. The cathedral stood as a permanent testament to this belief, a stone vessel forever tuned to the music of the spheres. The raw, unshaped block from the quarry was the embodiment of chaos, a dark and formless mass. This was the alchemical stage of nigredo, the blackening, a state of primal matter and spiritual confusion. For the alchemist, this was the essential first step, the dissolution of the old self into a dark night of the soul before any transformation could begin. The master builder understood this intimately. The quarry was his laboratory, where the dark, unformed stone was violently separated from the earth, its chaotic potential awaiting the order of the geometric mind. The act of cutting and rough shaping this stone mirrored the soul's own difficult beginning, the breaking down of ego and impurity. Then came the stage of albedo, the whitening. This was the purification, the washing of the materia in the waters of divine wisdom. In the cathedral's construction, this was the mason's yard, where the rough stones were meticulously carved and squared, their surfaces polished to a clean, white finish. The pure white limestone of the rising walls and the precisely cut ashlar blocks represented this state of clarity and purification. The soul, having passed through its dark night, is now cleansed and receptive, ready to receive a higher imprint. Finally, the stage of rubedo, the reddening, arrived with the application of fire and light. This was the ultimate goal, the fusion of spirit and matter into a perfected, radiant whole. For the cathedral, this was the moment the stained glass was set into its stone armature. The white, purified structure was suddenly infused with the fiery reds, golds, and blues of the windows, a literal baptism by colored light. This was the final transmutation, where the inert stone was ignited with divine presence, becoming a luminous vessel. Even the cathedral's silhouette whispers of this alchemical marriage. The twin western towers reaching for the sky can be seen as a representation of the two essential alchemical principles, sulfur and mercury. Sulfur, the masculine, fixed, and active principle, is one tower, stable and enduring. Mercury, the feminine, volatile, and spiritual principle, is the other, aspiring and fluid. Their union, symbolized by the unifying facade and the rose window between them, creates the philosophical child, the perfected work. So what was the ultimate philosopher's stone in this grand allegory? It was not a physical object, but the completed cathedral itself. This sacred vessel, born from chaotic stone, purified by geometric order, and finally illuminated by divine light, stood as the perfect symbol of a soul that had undergone its own profound transformation. The building process was a massive communal ritual, an external drama reflecting the most intimate internal journey, where the goal was not to create gold, but to build heaven on earth. The immense financial power of the Knights Templar could build more than just armies. It could raise cathedrals from the ground. While known as fierce warrior monks, their true, lasting influence may have been carved in stone, not won on the battlefield. They pioneered a revolutionary financial network, creating a system of letters of credit that allowed pilgrims and nobles to deposit wealth in Europe and withdraw it in the Holy Land. This made them the bankers of kings and the papacy, amassing a treasury of staggering proportions, and a significant portion of that wealth was funneled directly into architecture, funding the construction of churches, castles, and a network of distinctive round churches across Europe. These round structures, like the Temple Church in London, were not just a stylistic preference. They were deliberate copies of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, the site of Christ's tomb. For the Templars, this circular design was a powerful act of symbolic transfer, bringing the sanctity of the Holy Land back to Europe. Their extensive travels across the Mediterranean exposed them to the advanced engineering and pointed arches common in Byzantine and Islamic architecture, forms that were just beginning to stir in the West. The question that fuels centuries of speculation is simple. Did they merely pay for these new cathedrals, or did they bring back the very blueprints for a revolution? Their sudden and brutal dissolution in the early 14th century, orchestrated by a French king desperate to erase his debts, only deepens the mystery. With their vast wealth never fully accounted for and their leadership silenced, legends erupted. Had they hidden a fabulous treasure, perhaps the lost wealth of the Temple of Jerusalem itself, within the walls of a cathedral they helped to build? Did their round churches encode a secret geometry, a map to something even more valuable than gold? While mainstream history sees them as powerful patrons and financiers, their shadow looms large over the Gothic explosion, leaving behind a legacy where the line between banker, builder, and keeper of forbidden secrets becomes forever blurred. Your own sense of self would shrink within those walls. This was an intentional, calculated effect. The designers of these spaces understood human psychology on an intuitive level, engineering an environment that worked directly upon the mind and emotions. Before you even reached the main door, the sheer scale of the facade began the process. You were dwarfed by ranks of stone kings and prophets, made to feel small and insignificant against this testament to divine power. Then you crossed the threshold. The transition was deliberately jarring. You moved from the noisy, chaotic, sunlit world of the everyday, the profane, into a vast, shadowy interior. Your eyes needed a moment to adjust. The air felt cooler. The hustle of the street was replaced by an immense, resonant silence. This shift from the bright and familiar to the dim and mysterious was the first step in a psychological recalibration. It forced you to leave the ordinary behind. As your vision cleared, the true manipulation of space began. Your gaze was drawn irresistibly upward, following the relentless vertical lines of the pillars as they soared into the shadowy heights of the vaulted ceiling. This upward pull is not a passive observation. It triggers a deep physiological response. It creates a sensation of awe, that overwhelming feeling of wonder and reverence in the face of something vastly greater than yourself. In this state of awe, the brain's default mode network, the part associated with self-focused thinking and mind-wandering, quietens down. The constant internal monologue, the worries and ego-driven thoughts begin to fade. The architecture was quite literally designed to quiet your sense of self. Having subdued the ego, the space then fills the senses with a new reality. The light did not come from the common sun, but was filtered through a mosaic of sacred stories in jewel-toned glass. This transformed light fell in dappled, colorful patterns on the stone floor, creating an atmosphere that felt separate from the outside world, a realm apart. The sheer volume of the nave, the echoing quality of the sound where a whisper could carry for seconds, all contributed to a feeling of boundless space, of the infinite. This combination of awe, selflessness, and perceived vastness is the classic recipe for a transcendent experience. The building was a machine for generating spiritual encounters, guiding you from a state of individual concern to a feeling of connection with something eternal and immense. Every curve, every shaft of light, and every echoing footstep was part of a carefully orchestrated journey, leading you not just to an altar, but to an altered state of consciousness. Even as the last medieval cathedrals were completed, their spiritual language seemed to fade into history, replaced by the rational lines of the Renaissance and the strict orders of classicism. Yet the echo of the master builders never truly vanished. It waited for an age that would yearn for its mystery once more. That age arrived in the 19th century, a time of industrial smoke and relentless progress that paradoxically ignited a powerful nostalgia for the medieval past. This was the birth of the Gothic Revival, a movement that was far more than a stylistic preference. It was a philosophical crusade. At its fiery heart was the English architect Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin. For Pugin, Gothic architecture was not merely beautiful, it was morally righteous. He famously declared it the only true Christian architecture, believing its honest expression of structure and its spiritual aspiration stood in stark contrast to what he saw as the pagan and deceitful classicism of his day. His passionate writings and breathtaking designs argued that a society's values were reflected in its buildings, and that a return to Gothic principles was a return to faith, community, and craftsmanship. His most enduring legacy is etched into the London skyline, the Palace of Westminster, home to the Houses of Parliament. This monumental project, rebuilt after a devastating fire, became the ultimate manifesto for the Gothic Revival. Pugin, working with architect Charles Barry, infused every detail with symbolic meaning. The intricate stone tracery, the forest of spires, and the soaring vaults were not mere decorations. They were a deliberate attempt to cloak the modern machinery of government in the spiritual garment of the Middle Ages. It was a bold statement that even secular power should aspire to a higher order, but the revival was not confined to Europe. Across the Atlantic, American architects adopted the style for universities, churches, and even skyscrapers, seeking to lend their young nation a sense of history and gravitas. This longing for meaning did not end with the 19th century. Today, a new generation of architects continues to draw from this ancient well of wisdom, even if they use modern materials like steel and reinforced concrete. They understand that human beings have a deep, perhaps innate, response to certain proportions and patterns. Contemporary sacred buildings, from chapels nestled in nature to grand urban cathedrals, often incorporate the principles of sacred geometry, using the golden ratio or Fibonacci sequences to create spaces that feel instinctively harmonious and serene. The resonance of these forms extends even into secular spaces, where architects design hospitals, libraries, and homes with an awareness of how light, volume, and proportion can affect our well-being, our mood, and our sense of peace. Why does this ancient language of stone and symbol continue to speak to us so powerfully, even in our digital age? It seems to answer a persistent human hunger for architecture that is more than just shelter, for spaces that embody meaning, mystery, and a tangible connection to something beyond the mundane. The legacy of the secret architects is not a forgotten relic, but a living tradition, a timeless blueprint for building a world that nourishes the soul. Leonardo da Vinci's famous sketch of a man inscribed within a circle and a square feels like a Renaissance revelation, yet that same idea was quietly built into the stones of every great cathedral centuries before. The master builders held a profound belief that the human form, crafted in the image of God, was the ultimate standard of divine proportion. They saw the body itself as a living temple, and they designed their stone temples to reflect its sacred geometry. The entire layout of a cathedral could be generated from the dimensions of an idealized human figure. The distance from the nave floor to the apex of the vault might correspond to the height of a man with his arms outstretched, a posture echoing the cruciform shape of the building itself. The width of the transepts could be determined by the arm span of this same figure, while the central crossing, the Sacred Heart of the church, was often aligned with the position of the heart within the symbolic body. This was not a vague aesthetic choice, but a precise mathematical alignment. They used units of measurement derived from the human body, such as the foot or the cubit, the length from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, ensuring that every measurement resonated with a familiar, organic scale. Even the columns supporting the immense weight above were not arbitrary pillars. Their height and girth were frequently calculated using ratios found in the human form, creating a rhythm that felt stable, graceful, and inherently alive. Why would they go to such lengths? Because a space built to human proportions, even on a monumental scale, feels intuitively right. It creates a deep, subconscious harmony between the worshipper and the architecture. You do not feel crushed by the scale, you feel embraced by it, as if the building is an extension of your own being. The cathedral becomes a magnified reflection of humanity itself, a vast stone body designed to house the human spirit, making the divine feel intimately close and profoundly personal. That external stone armature is a masterclass in redirecting force. The flying buttress appears to defy logic, a stone bridge leaping through the air to clasp a wall that soars 100 feet above the ground. Its genius lies in a simple but profound physical principle. It transforms a destructive push into a stable support. The immense stone vaults inside the cathedral generate a powerful outward thrust, a sideways force that wants to push the walls apart and send the entire structure collapsing into rubble. The flying buttress intercepts this dangerous thrust before it can do any harm. It acts like a brace, catching this outward push and channeling it along its own elegant curve, down into a massive stone pier firmly anchored in the earth. This externalization of support was nothing short of revolutionary. It meant the walls themselves were liberated. they no longer had to be thick, ponderous barriers whose primary job was to hold up the roof. Instead, they could become delicate skeletons of stone with the spaces between the structural bones filled entirely with the stained glass that defined the Gothic spirit. The wall, in effect, was dissolved into light, but this was not a reckless gamble. Each flying buttress was a product of intense mathematical calculation. The master builder had to visualize the invisible lines of force flowing through his building. He had to calculate the precise angle at which the buttress must meet the wall to most efficiently transfer the load, a problem of vectors and equilibrium. The curve of the stone arm was not merely for beauty, it was a carefully engineered path to guide the weight downward in a smooth, controlled descent. A buttress built at too shallow an angle would be ineffective. One built too steep might even introduce new points of stress. This marriage of rigorous physics and audacious vision created an architecture that was both breathtakingly light and astonishingly strong. The flying buttress, therefore, is the hidden key that unlocked the Gothic dream. It is the structural secret that made those celestial heights and radiant walls possible. A perfect fusion of engineering necessity and spiritual aspiration, where the solution to a physical problem became an icon of transcendent beauty. Despite all our scanning lasers and computer models, these stone giants still guard profound secrets. Modern engineers stand in awe before certain aspects of cathedral construction that our advanced technology cannot fully explain or replicate. One of the most enduring puzzles is the medieval mortar. The mortar holding these stones together for 800 years is not just surviving, it is often in better condition than the stones themselves and far more resilient than our modern Portland cement. Chemical analysis reveals it is a unique blend of lime, sand, and water, but the exact recipe and mixing technique are lost. It seems the builders used a hot mix process, slaking quicklime with sand and water to create a mortar that was self-healing. As tiny cracks form over centuries, moisture seeps in, reactivating the lime and allowing it to recrystallize, effectively knitting the fissures back together. Our modern mortars are harder, but they are brittle. When they crack, they stay cracked, allowing water to penetrate and destroy the stone. The medieval version was alive, a breathing, flexible skin that moved with the building and protected it from within. This was not a single secret formula, but a deeply intuitive, localized knowledge. A master builder would adjust his mix based on the local sand, the quality of the lime, even the weather, creating a perfect marriage between his materials and his monument. How did they lift the impossible? The question of how stones weighing multiple tons were hoisted hundreds of feet into the air with nothing but wooden cranes and human-powered treadwheels baffles us still. We know they used these machines, but the precise engineering of the ropes, pulleys, and the distribution of weight seems almost miraculous. The great treadwheel cranes, enormous wooden wheels where men walked like hamsters to provide power, were marvels of timber engineering in themselves. Yet, the stresses involved in lifting a multi-ton block of limestone, swinging it into a precise position, and setting it gently onto a thin bed of that magical mortar, all while swaying in the wind on a wooden scaffold, are staggering to contemplate. It suggests an empirical knowledge of physics that was passed down through generations of hands-on experience, a feel for the material and the forces at play that we have simply lost in our age of computerized calculations. Perhaps the greatest lost technique was not a physical recipe, but a way of thinking. The master builder possessed a holistic vision where the strength of a structure was not just a matter of physics, but of philosophy. He understood that a building must be allowed to breathe, to settle, to dance with the natural forces around it. This intuitive synergy between man, material, and method created a resilience that we can measure but not reproduce. Our attempts at restoration often fail because we try to impose a rigid, modern perfection onto an organic, medieval system. We replace their living mortar with our dead cement, and in doing so, we break the very spell that has kept these cathedrals standing for a millennium. This enduring mystery does not diminish our modern knowledge, but rather deepens our respect for theirs. It hints at a wisdom written not in books, but in the very stones, a silent testament to a genius we are still striving to comprehend. Lasers now trace the stones that medieval hands once set. In our digital age, we are deploying a new kind of vision to peer into the very soul of these structures, using laser scanners and photogrammetry to capture every curve and crevice with millimeter precision. This is not a replacement for the master builder's sacred geometry, but a powerful new lens through which to understand it. We are, in effect, reverse engineering their prayer in stone. The process creates a breathtakingly detailed point cloud, a digital twin of the cathedral composed of billions of individual data points. This virtual model allows researchers to perform measurements and analyses that would be impossible within the physical building, revealing the hidden logic etched into the stone. One of the most profound discoveries from this digital archaeology is the presence of slight, intentional imperfections. A perfect digital model of a nave might reveal that the pillars are not spaced at mathematically identical intervals. Our first assumption might be error, a mistake by the laborers, but a deeper look often tells a different story. These subtle deviations frequently align with key liturgical points, like the position of a major altar or the path of a solstice sunbeam. They suggest that the master builder on site was willing to adjust his perfect geometric diagram to serve a higher spiritual or functional purpose. The blueprint was a guide, not a rigid command. This reveals their genius as pragmatic artists, adapting celestial principles to the lived experience of worship. In other cases, these digital models have uncovered symbolic alignments that were invisible to the naked eye for centuries. The precise angle of a flying buttress might be found to align not just with structural forces, but with the rising point of a specific star on a saint's feast day. The entire layout of a chapel, when analyzed in 3 dimensions, might resolve into a complex polyhedron known to medieval mystics. These are not coincidences. They are hidden layers of meaning, confirming that the builder's symbolic language was even more sophisticated and multi-layered than we ever suspected. So, does this technological dissection rob the cathedral of its mystery? The answer is a resounding no. Instead of demystifying these wonders, the data deepens our awe. It shows us that the intuition and spiritual insight of the master builders were so advanced that we need 21st century tools to even begin to catch up to their vision.